Welcome to the Real Python Podcast. This is episode 65. The popularity of Python is continuing to grow. Developers across the globe are embracing the language. How is Python being used in all of these different countries? And how does an organization like the Python Software Foundation work toward the goals in its mission statement for supporting and growing this international community? This week on the show, we have Marlene Mhangami, a PSF board member and part of the Diversity and Inclusion Work Group. Marlene lives in Zimbabwe on the continent of Africa. She has been organizing events not only locally in Zimbabwe, but across all of Africa. She is the chair of Pycon Africa and has given talks at Pycon US, Pycon UK, and Pycon India. She has been working locally as an organizer and educator, and we talk about the challenges of teaching technology and programming to a population of young people. And some of these students don't have access to computers. She's also currently pursuing a computer science degree with the University of London. As a student, she's also interning with NVidia and working with them on the RAPIDS project. On a programming note, we had some initial noise with Marlene's microphone, but we did get it resolved about halfway through the episode. This episode is brought to you by DigitalOcean's app platform. All right, let's get started. The Real Python Podcast is a weekly conversation about using Python in the real world. My name is Christopher Bailey, your host. Each week, we feature interviews with experts in the community and discussions about the topics, articles, and courses found at realpython.com. After the podcast, join us and learn real-world Python skills with a community of experts at realpython.com. Hey, Marlene, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I have a whole bunch of interesting topics I wanted to dive into with you. It was really fun running into you sort of virtually at the tables at Pycon.
Yes, it was very, very cool. I spotted you and like a couple other people like Ricky and Jim, I think from the Real Python team. So it was really cool to see you virtually. It was really kind of a fun setup.
Yeah, I'd done something similar at PyCascades, but this was kind of an interesting way they limited the table sizes and stuff like that and allowed for kind of interesting, engaging conversations depending on, what you were interested in getting into. I thought that was cool.
Yeah, it was very, very cool. And I liked the format that you could, I hadn't actually, I was at PyCascades, but I didn't do any of the interactive things. So this was kind of, for me, my first experience of actually talking to people virtually, which was really nice.
Yeah. It's been nice to slowly come out of our shells.
Yes.
Yeah. So the first thing I wanted to kind of dive into is your relationship with the PSF. You're a PSF board member, but also a vice chair. Can you tell me a little bit about what those are and what you do for the PSF?
Right. So the PSF is, I think the positions sound more intimidating than they actually are, but the PSF is the Python Software Foundation. So it is the nonprofit organization that's behind Python. So whether that's protecting Python's trademarks or organizing sort of grants to give to communities, the PSF also runs Pycon US. And we also do a lot of things like just discussing different policies on how to better serve the Python community around the world. And so for me, I've been on the board for about 4 years now. I'm going into my 5th year on the board, which has been fun, but
that's great.
A lot. And so basically I am the vice chair for this year. And for the most part, I just kind of represent, I would say, just an international voice in terms of trying to help the board with, I'm very interested in diversity issues and trying to make sure that we're serving the sort of underrepresented parts of our community from different parts of the world. So I think, a lot of things to do with just access and just sharing sort of my opinions is pretty much what I do.
That's cool. I'm intrigued by just the global nature of something like a language, and then having an organization that's sort of global also, to kind of think about, okay, well, what is happening with the language in different parts of the world, and kind of keeping on top of it. It's so easy to be sort of focused, especially with the sort of growth of the tech sector during the 2000s here in the US, and so forth, and starting to see, oh, there's these huge areas of that in other parts of the world. And then with Python being such a language for so many different purposes, being it for science or education, and just sort of like computer literacy, I can see the importance of that. And I wonder about that, like how strong is the presence of Python in Africa and maybe Zimbabwe in particular?
Right. Yeah, definitely. I think that Python is like, I think in the Stack Overflow survey, it's been voted several times now. I think since I've been on the board, it's always the most popular language in the world. So in terms of popularity, it's like right up there. And I think Zimbabwe is definitely on that list in terms of the popularity of Python. We actually have a Zimbabwean Python community. I call us Pythonese. I think other people also call us Pythonistas, but like,
yeah,
I don't think anyone from Zimbabwe calls us Pythonistas, except for maybe like 5 of us, and like me. But I know that like we have like a good community locally in Zimbabwe using Python. I think initially when I first joined the community and attended my first Pycon Zim, I remember hearing like a lot of people mainly using it as a scripting language, but like there has been a growth of like different sectors. So I think Django is being used a lot. So there's lots of Django developers locally. And yeah, I think it's really, really grown. And I would say that the community here is also quite large. It's not as active as like in places like Nigeria. Like I think about Nigeria and on the continent of Africa and how much Python is being used there. And it's definitely much bigger, but I definitely think in terms of popularity across the continent of Africa, Python is really popular.
So when you look at, you mentioned Pi Zimbabwe, or how is it pronounced?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the Python community in Zimbabwe. We don't actually have a name like the local community here. We just have a WhatsApp group at the moment.
Okay.
We used to have like a Pycon. Well, we actually do have a Pycon, but it's not, the Pycon was canceled I don't think we had one last year, and I don't think we had one. I don't think we're going to have one this year as well.
Okay.
But we do have a Pycon that's local in Zimbabwe.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's across the continent, and it seemed like over the last 3 or 4 years, you've been traveling across Africa and visiting a lot of those other ones. Like I saw one for, there's a couple different talks,
right,
of different ones, and
yeah,
the Nigeria one.
Nigeria, Namibia I've also been there quite a bit. I've been to Ghana. The Ghanaian Python community is really strong. I also was the chair of Pycon Africa for the inaugural conference, which was in 2019, and then the 2021. So that's like the annual gathering of the Pan-African Python community. So for all of us across the continent, it's like the one conference we have a year. And so I was really stoked to be able to be the chair of that for the past 2 years. So that's been really, really fun.
Is there one, I don't know if you can speak of it yet, is there one planned for 2021?
There is not one planned for 2021. And I don't know, like, I think we should be announcing that soon. So hopefully, I'm sure this will go out before, like after we've announced it. But I don't think we aren't going to have a Pycon this year for Pycon Africa. I think just because I think we are really trying to figure out how to connect more with local Python communities in really tangible ways. So we're trying to create sort of an organizing body, I think, that will be able to help, connect with local communities and also serve those communities as well. And yeah, and I think we have decided that we want to focus on that this year. I'm not the chair this year as well. Yeah, I think last year when we ran it online, when we ran Pycon Africa online, it was a lot of work and it was really difficult, to be honest. It was very difficult because Africa, I think, has a lot more challenges when we talk in terms of connectivity.
Sure.
I think not everyone is able to stream a conference because that takes your internet has to be good. You have to have either like Wi-Fi, proper Wi-Fi, or you have to have lots of data. And that's something that's a challenge to some communities. And so it was quite difficult, I would say. So, yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. That kind of leads me into a question I have that builds on top of the idea that you're, sort of changing your focus a little bit about engagement within, more localized communities. And I feel like maybe that's how you started. You had gone to university,
Right.
and then when you kind of came back to Africa, you kind of got a little more involved in Python. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that, and then
Yeah,
kind of how
sure.
that translates into what you're doing now.
Yeah, sure. So I have been in the past, I don't know how many years ago now. I went to the States and I was in Pennsylvania and Indiana as well for a bit. And I was studying molecular biology initially, I thought that I wanted to be a doctor. And then lots of things that happened that just changed my mind. I discovered I don't like blood.
Me too.
Yeah, it's not the nicest thing to be seeing on a regular basis, and
Yeah.
I also am not a big fan of cadavers and things like that as well. I so I came back. I remember there was a summer where I came back home to Zimbabwe, and I was really kind of thinking about what do I actually want to do with my life? What do I want to actually do? What do I enjoy doing as well? And so there were lots of different things that I just decided I wanted to explore. And so I kind of gave myself a year to just focus on trying things out. And I remember I started just like it's kind of a very long story, but I started a nonprofit organization called ZimboPy. That the purpose of that organization was to teach girls how to code in Python. And, the goal of that was I wanted to do something that I felt was connected to my local community, that I felt was serving my local community and kind of just, giving young girls who, I felt didn't have the same access that I saw in the United States. Like when I went to the States, I saw that, okay, wow, there's so much access to education. There's so much access to knowledge. And I had met so many people who were creating things. And I felt that when I was back home in Zim, that same access was not available to Zimbabwean girls. I mean, it's also boys as well, but like I was thinking about myself and thinking like a couple of years back, would I ever have known that I could code in at all? Like, would I have access to that knowledge to know that I could actually do something like computer programming? And I felt that was missing in my local community. And so kind of focused on that and created this really cool nonprofit with some friends of mine.
So I wonder about the types of things that you would teach someone who, they're completely new to the idea of really even computing. And I think you mentioned this in your Real Python interview, how
Right.
Any kind of computer classes that you had before were more focused on like general applications, like this is Word, this is Excel, this is a computer.
Exactly.
It has storage, it has a peripheral, it connects to the internet, like the generic, like computer literacy more than like anything to do with it. So I can imagine if maybe that's the baseline that you're working with, jumping into, okay, let's create something with a programming language.
Right.
So what are the types of things that you would teach them?
Yeah. So I think, we got to a point where we were connecting with girls from sort of the high density areas in in Harare.
Okay.
And so a lot of these girls, when they came in, they had like literally never been able to touch a computer before. And so like everyone has phones. So they were like taking selfies with the computer, which was really kind of this weird moment for me to see. But, so a lot of it was just starting at that baseline of that same thing that I was talking about in the interview of like teaching them this is what a computer is, these are sort of the basic things to get started with a computer. And then also from there, then just building those basic building blocks of then going into programming. Something that we really did to kind of introduce some basic programming concepts was to introduce hardware.
Okay.
So we did use Raspberry Pis and things like that just to make it, I think, more engaging when we were, sort of teaching and things like that. That's something that we used as well. But mainly it was really starting from the basics of, just introducing them to the world of computers.
I think of the Django Girls project as a tool that a lot of communities all over the world have used as not only a platform of tutorials, but also as a way to kind of get kids interested, because at that point they've created something that then is up on the web. Again, that's another limitation potentially, depending on where you're geographically and the kind of situation, as far as you mentioned the disparity of potentially having internet or not having it, and so forth. But if everybody has a phone, then they could kind of share their work online, is something I think would be kind of exciting too. Is that something you explored also?
Yes, we definitely, like, the first things that when we were initially introducing them to Python was the Django Girls curriculum, which is great because it's free online and it's super accessible. And I think it's presented in a format that's really easy to follow. And so, yes, we did do a lot of work with the Django Girls curriculum and just following that. And I thought that was, the girls were able to make their own websites and things like that. And I think that was something that was also very exciting. So yeah, definitely Django Girls is fantastic.
Cool. The types of phones and stuff they have are completely, like, they can get to the web and check out other sites and do that sort of stuff, right?
We definitely had, so at first so there were two groups of girls that we taught. So there's one group of girls that had Android phones that are like coming from, middle class, upper class, Zimbabwe, where they have smartphones. They do go home and they do have internet.
Okay.
So at home they could, play around and also upload their websites and do whatever they wanted, and just, that was fantastic. But we definitely had also another group of girls that we were working with that was in another part of the city as well. That's the group I was talking about that didn't have as much access. And they did have like phones that had a camera and things like that, but I wouldn't say they had like a lot of access to the internet. In terms of like, even when we would host a club, an after school club, where these girls would come, we worked with one of the local community centers, and they would come to this community hall, and we got some amazing donations of laptops from GitHub and from different people who just wanted to help with the program. And so the girls would come there and work on the Django Girls curriculum, work on different things at this community center. But oftentimes they would go home and, they don't have internet at their houses. They don't have I don't think they're using data on their phones to like explore coding. I just don't think that, like, it's also expensive and things like that. So lots of challenges. Like, I think, I'm not going to lie, I think I took a break because I was surprised by how many challenges there were that I definitely was not prepared for. And it's definitely something that I'm hoping to I think for a while my focus has been on the international Python community for the past year and a half or so, like the international community and the African community. But I'm definitely getting to a point where I feel like I want to go back to focusing on the local, and I think I have a bit more knowledge now and a bit more wisdom about how I would go like do certain things. But yeah, it's a lot of work. It's really tough, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about all those challenges. I had a very, I don't know, not similar, but like a unique kind of experience when I moved to Hawaii briefly, and I was looking for work, and I worked for the Boys and Girls Club there, and I was teaching sort of video editing and some of these other like kind of tools that it was like a middle school in Hawaii, and so a lot of these kids didn't have computers at home either, and so it was one of these experiences of like, teaching them what's possible with computers. And
Yeah.
my background was audio and video and that sort of stuff. And so kind of giving them an idea of what they could create. And it's frustrating if the person isn't going to be able to go home and work with it. It'd be like, teaching somebody piano or guitar and them not having the instrument. They would, have to wait an entire week to come back to get back to messing with it. And so I wonder about like, even if providing books or other resources like that helps in those sort of situations. I'm sure those are the challenges you're thinking about all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. We had like we did get some really great donations of books from the Django community, where the girls were able to take books home and kind of study those books study using books. And so that was really a positive thing as well. I definitely think books are a great way to kind of bridge that gap as well. So I would definitely, if I could go back, I would have invested more in books as well. But we did get some great donations. Sort of this introduction to Django. We also had 2 scoops of Django as well donated, like a couple of those books. So there was a lot of really great input from the community. But I do think books are a great way to bridge that gap.
DigitalOcean's app platform is a new platform as a service solution to build modern cloud-native apps. With App Platform, you can build, deploy, and scale apps and static websites quickly and easily. Simply point to your GitHub repository and let App Platform do all the heavy lifting related to infrastructure. Get started on DigitalOcean's app platform for free at do.co/realpython. That's do.co/realpython. Over the last several years of doing what you've been doing with the PSF, what are some of the other challenges that you've been approaching, across the whole community of sort of the global, as before you've now kind of refocused to local?
Right.
What were some of the things that you were focusing on for the PSF?
Right. So I definitely feel like in terms of the international community, there's a bunch of different challenges, I would say, that we face. I think that Python, because it was created in, I'm not sure where Guido actually created it, whether it was in Europe, because I know he was from Europe, and then I guess he moved to the United States. I don't know. I need to fact check that.
Yeah.
But it was created in that region. And because of that, I think the nucleus of Python has always been in the United States and Europe. And even when we look at the membership of the Python Software Foundation, the PSF, it's mainly from that region. When you look at the core developers, in terms of technical leadership for the language, it's mainly in those areas again. And so last year, when the PSF we had our elections again, and there were a lot of fantastic candidates that were running from different parts of the world, because I think the PSF, part of the mission of the PSF is to help to support the growth of an international and diverse community of Python programmers. And so I know that for a couple of years, a lot of the board was doing outreach in different parts of the world, whether that was our work in Africa, whether that was our work in Latin America, and just different areas in Asia. There's lots of community members out in Asia. And I think last year we had a lot of people running for the Python Software Foundation Board of Directors, but from those different countries, but they, they ran, but they weren't elected into office. And we had, I think everyone that was elected ended up being from the US or Europe. And so I do think that there's like some challenges in terms of getting representation from the global Python community into that center of the Python space. So whether that's on the Python board of directors, whether that's on the technical side with core development or whatever it is, I think one of the major challenges that we're facing is trying to make sure that Python is being used everywhere around the world. How can we make sure that we have some good representation so we're able to serve all the areas where people are using Python and not just the United States and Europe?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So it seems like kind of a two-prong issue in the sense that you need to get people to want to follow the path to get more involved with the PSF,
Right.
but then you also need the population that is the voting members of that to elect those people. So that does sound like quite the challenge.
Yeah, it is. There's an election even coming up soon. I think the next election is in June. And I think it's been difficult I think it's one of the challenges is there are fantastic people from the United States and Europe who've done so much work for the Python community. Every single person on the board right now, I would say, has contributed so much to the Python community. And I think that it's really difficult then when you have fantastic candidates who the membership at the moment is still, I would assume that the membership is still mainly from the United States and Europe. We're trying to get more demographic data on that. By the way, I'm the new chair of the new diversity and inclusion work group that's trying to work on some of these issues as well and support the PSF in that. But yeah, I think it's difficult to then also convince some of the people who are PSF members who have only met these people from the US and Europe or have heard of them because, they're part of their communities, to get those people to vote for someone they haven't met, but who's doing fantastic work maybe in Japan or who's doing fantastic work in Brazil. Really convincing those people, those members, to vote for those people has been more challenging, I think, than expected.
Yeah, I could think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned the term work group, and I saw some of that on the PSF website, and it seems like they kind of change depending on the needs of the PSF, the different formations of the work groups. Have you been involved in any other work groups, or is this the first one you've been working with?
So this is the first work group I've actually been a full member of. I have worked with a couple of the other work groups. There's a PSF grants work group that works closely with the board. There is a code of conduct work group as well. But these work groups are basically just a group of people that are focused on something. They have their own sort of mission and goals they want to achieve, and trying to achieve those goals in a way to support the PSF board of directors. The work group has been, for me, it's been a really great opportunity to kind of focus in on something that I'm very passionate about. And mainly our role is to be an advisory body to the PSF board of directors. Also just to have more time to focus on doing things like getting more demographic data, connecting with local communities around the world. And so those are things we're able to do in a work group context, I would say, that I'm not really able to do on the board.
Yeah, that makes sense. You can kind of get other members kind of involved in very specific areas.
Yeah.
Did you have a talk this year at PyCon 2021?
I didn't have a talk. I did do several things. I hosted the diversity and inclusion group. We had a panel session where we were kind of sharing about the goals of the diversity and inclusion work group. And yeah, and that was really fun. I also hosted the PSF EMEA members meeting, and then was just hanging around the PSF booth. I think this year I was generally, I think in 2021 I got to the point where I was just like, I think at the beginning of the year I took a break from applying or giving talks just because I felt very much zoomed out.
Totally. Sure.
Yeah, so I was just like, I think I'm gonna take a break this year. But I definitely attended and I thought it was really fantastic. There's so many great talks.
That's one of the things I kind of like about what I'm doing with the show is that I kind of like it not being video
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yes.
It's nice to see other people in person also, but I think sometimes it becomes like this whole thing where you're worried about like, okay, well, how does everything look and,
Yeah.
and so forth, and what can people see about my life? Am I exposing?
Exactly.
And it kind of has this weird level of exhaustion that we've all experienced way too much in the last year.
Yeah, I mean, I've been really surprised by how much, like, how different it is, like, interacting with people online versus in person. I think I'm a really social person and I love meeting new people. So Pycon US, when I was there in person, was amazing for me. I loved, like, I was like up until late meeting other people and like going to stuff. And like at this year's Pycon, I was just like, because it was the time zones were different for me. So
Yeah.
it was hitting 9 p.m. and I was so tired.
Yeah.
And I think it's just I don't know, there's just an extra level of energy I think that you have to bring to Zoom calls or whatever it is, because I don't even know why it's just more draining, I would say, but it was still fun. But it's definitely different.
Yeah. And I can imagine if we were to follow a whole nother year of virtual conferences, that I think the people might start really waning on them,
Yes.
because it's difficult. I mean, not only for the organizers, just the energy of being in person and putting those kinds of things together is just kind of a very different thing. So
Yeah,
I can understand that.
absolutely.
To go back to Pycon Africa briefly,
Mhm.
the 2019 one of the things I think is interesting is just the idea of trying to pull all these sort of disparate communities, which I can imagine are very different across the whole continent of Africa.
Mhm.
Even just the idea of like not having experience of traveling in Africa. I think about, okay, was
Mhm.
everybody able to travel by plane, or
Right.
they drive massive distances? Like I don't even know if it's like a train system. I think of everything very, unfortunately, Europe and US centric, like you mentioned, or even, having lived in Hawaii, I have a little more experience with like Australia and Japan and so
Right.
forth, but I have like no idea of like, what is it even like to bring all those people together?
Right. It was really, I think that the team, the new chair of Pycon Africa is someone called Manny Young. And he is also, I think, the head of the Ghanaian Python community as well.
Okay.
And he was working with me and the team. Like, we had a fantastic executive committee in terms of executing the in-person conference. And I think that it was difficult to, like, at first, I think it was quite difficult to coordinate everyone. And I think for myself as well, it was just like making this decision, because when you're running a PyCon, usually you are not getting paid for it. And for me, it was completely like a a voluntary thing that I signed up to do. And I knew it was going to take a lot of time, but I didn't know how much, like, it's a lot of time and a lot of effort that you
Yeah.
have to put in to just organize everything. And it's a lot of fundraising. It's a lot of trying to convince sponsors to invest in the Python community in Africa. I think that's somewhere that we are still trying to get to. But in general, I think that it wasn't bad. Travel within Africa is slightly more, I would say it's a bit harder because it is more expensive. Africa is also really big, like it's super, super big. So
Yeah, it's huge.
there is no train system that is going to take you, maybe like for me, from Harare to Ghana. So a lot of the people that were coming from across the continent had to fly in. And so we did, particularly for the first conference, we did do a lot of fundraising for people to get transportation to be able to get there. But when it was like, I loved it. Like it was, it was very stressful to organize, but it was so, so good. I really loved just the mixture of cultures. There's so many similarities, I would say, of people across the continent. And I think that for me, it was fantastic to just connect with people who are interested in Python from different parts of Africa and see our similarities, and just the way we view things is just very similar as well. And just, yeah, it was just really a good experience. Very, very positive experience for me. I love Ghana. I love like the whole Python community. I think across the continent is fantastic. And if anyone is considering coming to Africa, I would say just plan to come for a Pycon Africa. It's really good.
Kind of going back to, not only the educational part that we talked about, but also just, I kind of want to get an idea of the scope of like, what are the types of projects? Like we mentioned Django several times, but like, what are the types of projects that you see across the different countries in Africa, and how they're using Python? Like what's that landscape look like of like, okay, these people are using it for a newspaper, or these people are using it for, a health system or what have you. Like, you have experience with that? Like, is that something that showed up during the conference?
Right. I think I'm trying to think. So during the conference, I think there's a lot of use of, like, even when we were reviewing the proposals or the talk proposals,
Yeah.
there were a lot of proposals on AI and machine learning. And
okay, we had a little microphone issue, but we're back.
Yes.
And Marlene might sound just slightly different, but that's okay.
Yes.
We're talking about AI projects across Africa.
Right. So yeah, I think AI is something that has become really, really popular across the continent of Africa. And I think that it's an exciting field for sure, but it's definitely it's the specific field where we got the most talks submitted.
Yeah, and too much of the same thing is going to not be super interesting for the audience after a while.
Yes, 100%. We had to look for. But I would say that there were other talks as well. There was one serverless talk. There were some talks on Django, of course. I think that's really popular. Some talks on Flask as well. I think one talk on Flask. There was a talk on cryptocurrency. I think it was like a Python and some cryptocurrency talk for sure, which I thought was also very interesting. So yeah, definitely a wide variety of talks and a wide variety of ways people are using Python. But 100% AI and machine learning is the most popular.
This week, I want to shine a spotlight on another Real Python video course. It explores a basic building block that many other algorithms are built on. It's titled Introduction to Sorting Algorithms in Python. The course is based on an article by Santiago Valderrama, and in the course, Liam Pulsifer takes you through how different sorting algorithms in Python work and how they compare under different circumstances, how Python's built-in sort functionality works behind the scenes, how different computer science concepts like recursion and divide and conquer apply to sorting, what big O notation is, and how to use it to compare the efficiency of different algorithms. I think it's a worthy investment of your time to learn how sorting algorithms are structured, and how these building blocks work independently, but also how they can be organized to work together and with other algorithms. Our video courses are broken into easily consumable sections. Where needed, we include code examples for the techniques shown, and all the lessons have a transcript, including closed captions. Check out the video course. You can find a link in the show notes, or you can find it using the newly enhanced search tool on realpython.com. I don't know if you wanted to dive into your work with data science. Did you get into that somewhat through your medical studies and working in data science?
No. So right now I'm interning, I'm still doing school. So I'm interning with the Rapids team at NVidia.
Oh, cool.
So I have been working with them as a software engineer, and I primarily work on a data science library called cuDF. And I actually don't do any data science. I know, a good amount of data science, but I mainly engineer like features and do bug fixes. It's an open source project. I'm taking a lot of issues and kind of working on those, but from an engineering side, as compared to like a data science side.
Yeah, I've been talking to a bunch of people about sort of the tooling side of helping the data scientists be able to do what they do. That's really interesting. Could you maybe dive in a little deeper into that?
Sure.
What the Rapids project is, and then maybe we could talk about. I wonder about, again, going to the hardware thing, like what you need in order to use a library like that.
Sure. Yes. So the goal of the Rapids project is to accelerate data science using GPUs for anyone that has very large data sets. It's going to make your work a lot. I think it should, in most cases, make the work faster for you if you're trying to do computations or data aggregations or different things like that on your data. The Rapids project will sort of help with that. So my team specifically with the cuDF data frame library, it's built to mirror pandas. So anything that you can do with pandas, you should be able to do with cuDF. But the only difference is that your computations are going to be done on the GPU. So that's going to make the work that you do much faster. So yeah, you'll be able to hopefully get, in most cases, it's going to make your work faster. And I will say that it's for when you have large data sets, that's when you see a significant difference using GPUs as cuDF as compared to pandas, for example. And so, yeah, I think it's a really exciting project and have been really enjoying it.
So in that circumstance, I can imagine there's setting it up on a local workstation with some particular NVIDIA GPU cards, but is there also part of the program for cloud-based processing?
Yeah, definitely. So there are a number of different cloud providers that give you access to a GPU. I know Google Colab does that. If you want to just go ahead and like sort of experiment, Colab has an option to like maybe run a Jupyter Notebook, for example, and to work with your data on Colab with the GPU. I know also a couple other, I think Amazon also has some GPUs that you can work with as well that are all online. And yeah, so I do think it's also trying to make GPUs more accessible, or that world more accessible to data scientists. Like even if you have just your laptop, you should still be able to run Rapids if you're using things online, even if you just want to experiment. I know that the Rapids site has a Colab notebook that's already prepared that you can run right away. I think if there are show notes, we could leave that, I guess, in the show notes. But
yeah, that sounds good.
But yeah, that's definitely something you can do online.
I was looking at the blog on the NVIDIA developer site for it, and it mentioning Google's Kubernetes engine and a bunch of other kinds of interesting stuff. So it seems like a really nice project to kind of get an idea what you can get involved with and learn a little more about cuDF and Rapids. So we'll definitely include links for all that.
Yeah, definitely.
Nice. All right. Well, I have these weekly questions I like to ask everybody. And what is something that you're excited about in the world of Python?
Well, for that one, I think that I think it's because I've kind of been in this world with Rapids and this world of Python and performance. And so for me, it's been really interesting and really exciting to kind of see the conversations that have been happening about that sort of in different circles. And like, I remember I actually read that this year, Guido gave a talk at the Python Language Summit where he was talking about how he wants to, like, one of his goals is to increase the speed of CPython by 2 times. Like, so in, I think, the 3.11 release of Python, of CPython, Python is supposed to be 2 times faster, which I think is really cool. And I don't know as well if there's just been, because I was also just reading different blogs about the language summit, and there were so many like discussions about Python and performance that I was pretty surprised about.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if I had not been paying attention before, or if it's just now that I'm just like more focused on it. But it's been pretty cool to see all the work that's being done to speed up Python. So yeah, excited about that.
It really feels like a theme that's throughout the Python world right now, specifically. And I don't know if it's partly the parser change is part of it that's allowing new sort of structural things in the language and how the language can be just even parsed that allows these kind of interesting things to happen. But yeah, and then there's a bunch of stuff happening with like little compilers and other interesting projects. So yeah, it's an exciting time. Like who would think that, kind of late in the language development, it's like, oh, well, now we're gonna do this massive speed boost.
Exactly.
Which is cool.
Yeah, it is it's very interesting and very exciting. Definitely lots of different ways people are doing it, but it's cool that it's becoming a really hot topic. So very cool.
Yeah, nice. Sure. So what's something that you would like to learn next?
Well, I mentioned earlier for sure that, well, there are 2 things actually, I would say. On one hand, like just technically speaking, I'm interested in learning more about Dask, and also like async is also something I'm a little bit more interested in these days. And kind of sort of diving into and getting a full understanding of those. But I'm also very interested as well in learning how to be a better teacher. So I mentioned earlier before that I would love to kind of get back to a place where I can focus more on my local community at some point, or even not just my local community, but in different sort of emerging areas, and do more teaching. I would love to kind of figure out how people become good teachers. I feel like I'm an okay teacher, but I think I could be better. So I'm trying to learn that as well, for sure.
Yeah, it's a real journey.
Yeah.
I spent 10 years working in a school for recording engineers, and it was very specific domain, very specific topics of like digital audio and MIDI and these things that are, very technical focused. And I was teaching it to students that were much more interested in running into a recording studio with a huge console and playing around in there. And I'm trying to teach them about computer concepts. And so it was always a bit of a challenge of like, a lot of them were post high school also. So it's okay. How do I do infotainment? Like it has to be interesting and exciting. And it was like a bit of a comedy routine at the same time.
Yes.
So there's a lot of challenges to that.
Yeah. I think that's the thing, right? You have to if you're teaching, you have to be entertaining. Like you need to be engaging for it to be like for people to retain the knowledge and people to be interested. And I think like you talked about sort of using hardware and things like that for audio programming and things. I think hardware is a really good way to teach people.
Yeah.
And I got really interested in hardware in 2018 when Nina gave a talk at Pycon US, and she was talking about Adafruit and CircuitPython. And I remember I took home a CircuitPython playground. We got it in the swag bags. But I think that is something I'm also interested in using as a way to teach people hardware to do that, because I think it can also make it more engaging. Yeah, definitely interested in that as well. Possibly sound stuff, that seems interesting.
Yeah.
But it also seems like, I don't know how much Python plays into that, because I've also seen a lot of sound people are super into low level languages.
Yeah.
So still trying to figure that out.
Yeah, I'm right in that pocket there too.
Yeah.
Lucas Longa had a really interesting talk about creating an FN synthesizer, which was really kind of neat. And then I'm kind of finally getting back to electronics. Like I took a real long break. I moved from, I was living in a very dry climate in Arizona, and I moved to Hawaii.
Yeah.
And I kind of got away from electronics for 10 years, partly because the climate would just basically destroy everything.
Oh, wow.
It basically would get, like corroded, or,
oh, wow.
Like aluminum would have pits on it. It's just like the sea air was not friendly for those kinds of things, which is very interesting kind of development.
Yeah, I would never think that. I would not think that at all.
Yeah, it's weird. Yeah. So I was really into that. And I was like building pedals and building all those kind of things. And like batteries would corrode within like 6 months. And you're like, what happened?
Yeah.
I just looked away and this thing's destroyed.
Oh, wow.
So I've finally got back into it. And the thing that's fun about hardware, like you mentioned, is the idea that you really can teach somebody a handful of things about this piece of hardware, and they can look at it and go, well, there's like 12 or 24 more little switches and connections on this thing. Well, what do those do?
Yeah.
And then they can kind of think about, well, what if I really would like it to do this? And they take this ownership of it suddenly. And it's so much less connected to, this sort of like esoteric, like, okay, this is a for loop or whatever. You're really tying it to something.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. You're like tying like, oh, well, now I know why I want to iterate through things.
Exactly.
It's very cool.
It is 100%.
Yeah. So I like that idea too. And I'm working on a project right now. It's like a foot switch, which is funny because there's so many different people doing it, but I'm using it as like kind of a music context of like to help you learn how to play or something. So you can like rewind a video or fast forward a video and use it with your feet so that you can keep your hands on your instrument. And,
that's amazing.
And then, but you could use it for whatever you want. Like, I mean, there's like all these other interesting projects, like, mute my video on Zoom with a foot switch.
That makes sense. That's very cool. I definitely, it's a field, it's a part of programming that I'm interested in kind of in delving a bit more into. Yeah. So I would love to kind of figure out how to do that. I've done really, really basic things, but that sounds really cool.
Yeah, it's fun.
So I'm hoping to do more hardware stuff. And I think I also want to do more hardware stuff, like either for teaching or for fun. I think I just want to do it just like, I don't know. We'll see.
It's an interesting hobby. It's like, a lot of people like to build models or build other little intricate things, but it's so much more fun when you can build kind of a little tool that, you can use in other parts of your life.
Yeah, definitely.
Scratch your own itch on something like that. That's
exactly.
Neat. The last one is one that I don't ask that often, but I'm intrigued to think about it in this case. So what is something, as you've been learning and working through Python, what is something that you thought you knew and understood about Python, but ended up you were kind of wrong about it?
So I'm getting into again, I will give two answers here.
That's fine.
One that's like one that's a bit more technical, and then one that is not. So the first thing is, I guess, a bit more technical in terms of like, I didn't know, for some reason, I always thought like async IO used threads for some reason in my mind. And I found out recently that that's not true, that it doesn't at all. So that was really interesting. I kind of listened to I've been taking a course about it and just discovered that, which was really interesting. So I don't know if that will be helpful to anyone or not. But the other thing that I thought was really interesting as well is I was on Twitter today and I saw this Brian Oken. He also has a podcast. I think it's called It's Testing something, but testing code. Yeah. And he tweeted that he was asking if anyone uses foo, baz, and bar, right? I think those are like people in the computer world usually say those, and I've heard them being used, and I see people using them for variables. And I always thought in Python, that it came from Monty Python. And I don't know, like, that's, first of all, that's not great because I'm like outing myself that I have not actually watched Monty Python, but I just watched
that's okay.
I watched a couple of the trailers.
Not only is it a very old, but it's very, very specific to English culture in a lot of ways. So.
Exactly. I just watched the trailers, like a couple of small clips of it, and I felt like this looks really unrelatable for me. So I have not yet watched Monty Python, but I always thought that those names came from Monty Python, but they didn't. They actually are, apparently, people were sharing and said that it's actually part of just computer culture, and apparently it was first used
computer science backgrounds. Yeah,
exactly. And apparently it was first used at MIT or something like that. And it's not like I'm studying computer science, but like I've always thought it was a Python thing for some reason. And yeah, I just thought that was really interesting. I was just like, I was completely wrong about that.
No, it makes sense.
Yeah. But yeah, that's not really helpful for anyone, but just knowledge.
It's interesting. I think there may be other people that there's people that are joining Python every day and they're going to see that out there and wonder about it. Like I'm not a huge fan of using those sometimes. I think David Amos chimed into that thread also.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of in the same vein that I would rather, as sort of a best practice thing, even as I'm teaching someone Python or teaching them functions, to name a function foo makes it unrelatable in a certain way, that it sort of makes it sort of this mystical thing where maybe a best practice would be to just go ahead and give it a longer name that actually says what it's going to do, like print receipt or make connection or, connect to database or whatever, like make it very verby, you know, like I feel like functions are doing something. Well, and that's, and then I always would play around if I'm going to make a list of things, I would use the goofy Monty Python ones of like spam and bacon and lobster or whatever their goofy one that's from. But those to me like feel more like things, even though they're food, Yeah. So it's, it's a challenge and definitely computer science has its own weird, I don't know, sorcery, wizardry
for sure. It's definitely something that's just, I guess, like a cultural thing that is just there in the computer science world. But maybe I think it's just, I think it's fine to use it, but for sure had no idea. I have seen people using it before. Quite often in Python is the main place where I've seen it being used, and just had no idea what people were talking about when they would do. Because some people say it as a joke and then like laugh about it, and then I'm just like, but I can't I'm just like, I don't know where this joke is coming from.
Yeah, no, it's hard.
but generally, I think it makes sense for the functions for best practice to probably name them after what they're being used for. But it's very interesting.
So something I've been wanting to change about the way I end the show is I've wanted to kind of like say, okay, are there any final like call outs or social media stuff that you want to send out for anybody who's checking out the show?
Sure.
Yeah, sort of social media and call outs section.
Right. Well, for social media, if you'd like, you can follow me at Marlene_ZW. I am the main place you can follow me is on Twitter. My GitHub is MarleneZW. And I also have a website, which is just marlenemhangami.com. So if you look on my Twitter, which is Marlene_ZW, you can find my full name there. and it's just that.com. And then I don't know, if I would definitely recommend, if you are interested in data science and GPUs, to check out the RAPIDS library. It's an open source project, so we're always looking for more contributors. And so if you're interested in sort of that world of data science and GPUs, I would encourage you to check that out. You can take a look at the RAPIDS project. I think it's rapids.ai is the website. And also become a member of the PSF. The elections are coming up soon. And if you're a voting member, I would definitely encourage you to vote this year. There's some fantastic candidates. So would encourage you to vote for the people that are running this year.
Oh, that's great. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing all this with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Chris.
And don't forget, you can get started on DigitalOcean's app platform for free at do.co/realpython. That's do.co/realpython. I want to thank Marlene Mhangami for coming on the show this week. And I want to thank you for listening to the Real Python podcast. Make sure that you click that follow button in your podcast player. And if you see a subscribe button somewhere, remember that the Real Python podcast is free. If you like the show, please leave us a review. You can find show notes with links to all the topics we spoke about inside your podcast player or at realpython.com/podcast. And while you're there, you can leave us a question or a topic idea. I've been your host, Christopher Bailey, and look forward to talking to you soon.